Welcome to Round's Rant.
Hello and welcome to Round's Rant. Today I'm joined by former UFC champion and UFC Hall of Famer Ken Shamrock. Ken has also fought in the WWF for several years during the 90s, picking up multiple titles during his stint with the company. More recently, Ken has started his own podcast named World's Most Dangerous Podcast, and this can be found at www.dangerouspodcast.com. Now, to start off the podcast today, I'd just like to ask, how's things with you today, Ken?
Oh, it's good. Enjoying life and taking it one day at a time, but really enjoying myself now.
Good. Well, that's good to hear. And to kickstart proceedings, I want to start at the beginning. When you were a young kid growing up, describe your childhood and, some of the events that stand out for you when you think back on it.
Wow. I've lived a couple different lives. When I was born in Macon, Georgia. Grew up really with nobody, no parents watching us. Me and my two older brothers. We were kind of raised ourselves, and we grew up in a rough neighborhood. We were fighting all the time. Didn't have a whole lot of food. Didn't have any toys to play with. And we grew up real rough, and it was in the ghetto. A lot of fights and stuff, trying to survive and this and that. And that was probably till I was about 5, 6, 7, 8 years old. Then moved to Napa, California. Started school there. Ended up getting stabbed. Did some strong arm robbery. Got in trouble with the law. At 10 years old, I was in juvenile hall. Became a ward of the court, which means they became my parents. They put me in placements. I failed a bunch of placements. Ended up at we call the Shamrock Boys Home. That's where I was adopted by my parents who raised me, Bob and Dee Dee. And that's really where I really started to have a childhood and really started to have some clarity on what life's about. So the Shamrock Boys Home, where it was a group home for kids, is really where I had an opportunity to turn my life around.
Okay. And was there any kind of learnings from it? As you said, you only kind of started your childhood life, the normal life, at the age of 13, 14. But for all, as you're saying, when you were getting into the fights, when you had that, say, stab, when you were stabbed in that robbery, did that later on in life stand to you a bit? Did it give you a sort of kind of independence at an early age? Or did you look back on it with more of a negative view as opposed to kind of gain something from this tough upbringing?
No, I think if you're successful, if you go through a rough upbringing, if you're going to be successful later in your life, you're going to have to accept those things that have happened to you. And you have to learn from those experiences. And if you do that, then I believe that you become much more, you're much more likely to succeed and become successful if you're able to overcome those adversities. I think adversity is what makes people what they are, because that really does show you who you become. Because if you don't go through any adversities or any problems at all, which doesn't likely happen, but if you don't, then what kind of person are you? How do you know what kind of person you are? So I think with the people that have gone through adversities and fought through those adversities and become better people through those adversities really tells you what kind of character they are.
Yeah, no, I agree. And pushing on through your teenage years, did you go back to school and go to college, or how did the later years of your kind of childhood pan out?
Yeah, the later years, like I said, I was in and out of juvenile hall all the time. I hadn't really been in school, so I missed all of my grade school. I mean, I didn't have an education per se. So when I went into high school, when I was at the Shamrock Boys Home, I was 13 years old. I might have started out my freshman year, and I couldn't do first grade math. I mean, I couldn't even do add and subtract because I couldn't carry numbers over. I didn't understand how to do all that because I really didn't have an education.
Yeah.
So I went to special ed my first 2 years of high school trying to catch up to where everybody else was at. And the reason why I wanted to do that, not because I wanted to go to school, was because I found something that I really enjoyed and I was very successful at, and it made me become important to other people, and that was sports. Because I was good at sports, people did things for me. I mean, they went out beyond what they did for other kids, so that I would make my grade so I could play football, because I had to have a certain grade point average to play football. And so people went out of their way to make sure that I had those grades so that I could play on Saturday. So for me, I found something that made people like me, respect me, who I was. And so that was something I think that drove me even into sports later on, was I felt like, wow, you know what, if they could do this in high school, imagine when I get into pros, man, what they do for me. So I really started looking in that direction because it made me feel powerful. It made me feel wanted.
Okay. Well, you're saying there, as in, like, you identified a path, you identified a reason for you to, hopefully do good with your life. And you were saying that in college and stuff and school like that, you were mainly based around football. Did you continue that on into college, or did you go straight into, wrestling and mixed martial arts?
I played college ball.
Yeah?
I played at Shasta College. I played there. I played some semi-pro football. And same thing, people went out of their way to make sure they had tutors and things to help me so that I could play football on Saturday. And so I took advantage of that, not advantage in a bad way, but advantage in a good way. I mean, I went out and I actually got an education, I was like, wow, if these people are going to do this for me, then I'm going to take advantage of that, I'm going to use it. And so I got an education and went on and played college ball. I was an All-American in college ball, defensive captain. And so I did a lot with sports. It helped me become what I wanted to be in life, and that was successful. I had an opportunity to do other things later on, obviously, in pro wrestling and in fighting. I started taking a different direction. And because of what I learned younger was when I was like, if I would do what I was supposed to do and then go out there and train hard, work hard, then I could achieve the goals that I want to achieve, and I could become important in this world.
Okay. So what you're kind of saying there is that as long as it was kind of a sports orientated thing that you knew you could control the amount of effort you put into it, you felt that you could take on the world in a sense.
Yeah, I felt like that now I could become successful. I mean, you watch all the time these people running around and they're driving cars and having houses and, they're successful. And I knew that I couldn't do that. Like, I wasn't going to wear a suit. Yeah. It wasn't in my DNA, right?
Yeah,
but
exactly.
This I could do. Like, sports is something that I could control and that I can be successful in that era. Rather than the other one, because the other one I'll be beating my head against the wall and never get it. But sports I got very easily, and so I started attacking and going in that direction so that I could have the things I want in life.
Okay, and your first kind of major impact on a sport per se was mixed martial arts, and how did you get into that? What was the point where you were like, I want to be a mixed martial artist, I want to go on and obviously end up fighting in the UFC? Well,
I was doing pro wrestling in Mooresville, and Dean Malenko showed me this tape that Sammy Saranaka, who was the promoter for the U.S., had given him when he came up to the Mooresville, because he was from Florida. And he was down there wrestling on the circuit that we were in. And I met with him. He stayed with me. We drove together. And he showed me this tape. And I was like, dude, what is that? Because I saw these two guys. And they were punching and kicking and grappling and doing all these things that I'd never seen in one fight before.
Yeah.
Other than a street fight. And I was like, dude, what is that? And he says, "Oh, it's just UWF over in Japan." I said, "Man, I want to do that." And he looked at me and he goes, "Man, that's real." He goes, "They're not playing." I said, "Dude, I want to do that." He thought I was crazy. Well, I went up to Florida and I tried out with Sammy Saranaka at Dean's dad's gym, where Sammy was, looking for new talent. And I tried out there and I thumped everybody there. And so Sammy said, "Hey, maybe you come to Japan and work out a little bit." So I went to Japan. I trained up there. They put me through this tryout for about 2-hour tryout. Went through 4 different guys, and even fought the 2 guys I saw on tape. And they beat the hell out of me. I mean, just literally beat the hell out of me. And I had never been handled like that before.
Yeah.
So as soon as that happened, it was like, dude, I have got to learn that. And so that's the first thing I did when I went in. I started training and doing that. Sammy said, "Okay, I'll call you." So I go back home thinking like I didn't do well, because I got beat up. For the first hour I did fine, but after those other 2 guys got in there, they just thumped me, and I was like, "Oh man, they're not going to use me."
Yeah,
well, he calls back a couple of days later and says, "Hey, how'd you like to come up to Japan and train?" I said, "Yeah, absolutely." So I go up to Japan, and they just literally beat me up, dude. I mean, they beat me up, and I went back, and I just didn't think for a second that they were going to use me after that. He called and said, "Hey, in 3 months we have a show. Do you want to be on it?" I was like, "Me?" I was like, yeah. Yeah, he goes, "Yeah, you come to Japan, train for a little bit, and we'll put you on the undercard, and you can, we'll have you on the first show." And I was like, "Absolutely."
And was this UFC 1 at the time, or was it a different show?
No, this was Japan. This was Japan.
Yeah.
Yeah, this was back before UFC, man. This was back in, it had to be 89, 90. And so I did my first event, and I remembered it was in Naka something, Japan. It was about 17,000 people. And,
really, that big at that time?
Yeah.
Wow.
It was huge, man. 17,000 people. My very first fight was number 4 on the card, and it was in front of 17,000 people. And and I won my first fight, right? I mean, I literally just mauled this guy, and I beat him, and people started chanting my name. Of course, I didn't know it. Sammy came over and bumped me and said, "Hey, they're chanting your name." And I was like, "Oh," because I couldn't tell, They were calling me Wayne Shamrock instead of Ken Shamrock. And so they would chant my name after my first fight. And after that, man, I never looked back, man. I was like, this is awesome.
And how important do you think having to, because you were saying there the first time when you went into that trial, when they took you out initially, the first 1 or 2 times you were fine, but then you started getting beat up. But how important do you think it was for the fact that you were just so eager to learn that you've kind of viewed these kind of pastings or you getting beat up as learning experiences? How important do you think that was?
Well, it was important because this is what they were looking for. I didn't know it at the time, but here I was. I went in for the first 2 guys that were young boys, right? And I pretty much mauled them, threw them around. And then, of course, the other 2 guys, Suzuki and Funaki, came in, and they beat me up, right? But I kept getting up, kept going. And even Sammy had to say, "No, that's enough," because Sammy said, "Okay, that's enough." And I was like, no, I can go more. Because I felt like I didn't show enough, right? And he's like, "I can go more, and more." And he's like, no, it's fine. That's enough. So I think that the eagerness and the toughness that I showed and the never give up that I showed, that Sammy saw something there and said, "You know what, we could train this guy."
Yeah, no, definitely. And do you think then, moving just fast forwarding a bit to UFC 1, where that tournament took place, did you go into that thinking, I'm prepared, I'm good enough to beat everyone here, or were you just still kind of thinking, listen, I'm new to this, I could get pasted, or else I could kill someone at any moment?
Well, when I went into that first UFC fight, I was over cocky. I mean, I really believed that if there was no one there that could touch me. And so going into that fight, I was like, okay, I'm just going to thump these strikers, take them down and beat them up. And this guy wearing pajamas, which was Hoist Gracie with his gi walking around. I was like, man, he's going to be able to even touch me. I'm way too strong for him. And plus I know all the submissions too. So that was the one thing that I went in that I wished when I hindsight's 50-50, you get to be champion, having success, and you're walking into an arena that people don't understand, but you do. And so all that together, I was definitely caught off guard. But I think the one thing that probably made me the angriest was, even though I was cocky and I felt like there's no way that anybody could stop me, was when they took my shoes away, right? What I didn't have enough understanding, because I was too busy thinking about how good I was, and no matter what they did, they couldn't beat me, of really understanding of how important it was to have those shoes, considering I'd never been in the ring without them. But I just kind of like, whatever, take my shoes away. You guys put all these things in the way. I'm still going to beat you. That was what I felt. It was like, there's nothing you're going to do. It's going to stop me from winning this. And that was what I kicked myself in the tail for, because I should have said, no way. This is supposed to be anything goes, no rules, no time limit. You're not taking my shoes away. And if that happens, then we're looking at a different result.
Yeah, well, especially at that time, everyone who, especially the listeners listen to this, they probably don't realize that back then, the UFC, it wasn't the big, huge company that it is now. It was a case of, people had to battle behind the scenes to get it legalized or get certain things allowed for the night ahead on the day of the fight, and all these complications would be coming in and out every day. And I'm sure there was times early on there that you probably thought, are you going to fight? And I think when you actually became champ at UFC 5, I think, or it could have been UFC 3 a bit earlier, that the UFC and all its lawyers were battling to get the go ahead for the show.
Yeah, there was, like I said, a couple different times, and there was also another one where they had taken away punches, and if anybody punched, that they were going to arrest you. Well, I had a group home for kids at the time where I was teaching young kids like myself who had been going through group homes, and things that I was taught through sports and everything about how you could do whatever you want to do as long as you stay within the rules. You could be successful. But you got to stay within the rules. And this is something that I preach to these kids, because that's how I was taught. Was like, hey, man, you could be aggressive in football and wrestling, all these things you're doing. You got to stay within the rules. And if you succeed, you can have anything you want in the world. I mean, sky's the limit. And so I was preaching that, and then they basically took away the punches with the Severn fight. It was like, I was like, okay, well, how's that going to happen? I mean, I've got to beat this guy down in order to win. And so they took those away, and so I chose that I wasn't going to punch in that fight. And that was one of those fights where, if you look at it, was probably the worst fight in UFC history. Dan never shot on me. He never came after me. And, of course, I wasn't going to punch him. Well, he didn't know that at the time, but I wasn't going to punch him. I was going to wait for him to shoot on me and grapple with him. And he never shot. He just danced around the outside of the ring. And that was one of the most boring fights in history. But if you know what was going on behind the scenes, was that they actually banned punching. And so that was one of those. And during that time, it was almost like we even one time loaded up on a plane and went to Dothan, Alabama, because they actually had the day before, they said that they could not have the event there. For whatever reason, they agreed to it. They set the ring up. Everything was going to go forward. And then 48 hours before the event's supposed to go on, the state comes in and says, no, you guys can't have it here. So they had to load up the ring, put everything in a plane, load all that up, fly it to Dothan, Alabama. All the fighters and participants had to fly on another plane, get there next morning, set the ring up, and have the fight the next night. Wow. Giving away free tickets.
Well, probably rightfully so.
Right.
And to kind of sum up just the last kind of question on this period of the UFC with yourself, winning and becoming champ at UFC 5, how how big of a moment was that for you in relation to where you came from? I'm sure probably you thought about your childhood, all that went before you. You know, was that just a massively proud moment for you that, you know, you felt that everything that had gone before you had been worth it?
Yeah, I'll tell you, being a champion, especially in the UFC, and then, of course, being the champion in pancrase, the first champion in pancrase, and then being the first champion really in the UFC when it comes to single fights, you know, with the weight classes and all, being a heavyweight champion. Those are exciting. I mean, that you've done something that not too many people can do. I mean, you're the best in the world in 2 different countries. But I got to tell you, those were exciting. But I got to tell you, being inducted into the Hall of Fame is like, because now being inducted into the Hall of Fame, I don't have to think about my next fight being a champion, and it was all worth it. Like, I'm a champion, but you don't get to enjoy it if you're a true champion. You're thinking about the next fight, like who am I fighting next? How do I defend my title? So you don't really get to let it sink in and enjoy it. You're on to the next fight. Like, that's just medal. I got it. I achieved something. Who's the next one? Yeah. So you're always constantly looking for the next battle. But being inducted into the Hall of Fame is that time where you get to soak it all in and really, really look at your accomplishments and what you've done. And when I was inducted into the Hall of Fame, that was a moment where I realized that I had done something special. Yeah,
because weren't you? You were like the first guy to actually get inducted into it. Isn't that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And, you know, we'll probably touch on a bit of that later about the Hall of Fame and, you know, what the legacy has come with it. But before we get on to that, you just become champ. You know, a few years later, you find yourself losing the belt to Dan Severn. And then a few months later, you find yourself going to the WWF. I'm just wondering why did you go to the WWF and not stay in the UFC?
Well, I think they were having problems like you were talking about when you go to a state and they were fighting to get the fight to get put on every night or every day. There was always something coming up and they had to go to court to make sure they could continue to have the fight. And it just wore on Bob Meyerowitz. It just, one thing after another. Yeah. And so my contract came up and Bob called me and told me he wasn't going to be able to pay me what I needed for my contract, which we had already agreed upon. And I said, Bob, you know, utmost respect, but I have 4 kids. I got a family. I got to be able to pay my bills. I said, I got a gym. I got fighters. I said, man, I have a large overhead. I've got to be able to make the money I need to make in order for me to continue to keep doing what I'm doing. And if you can't pay me that money, then I have to go do something else. And I hope that you would understand that. And Bob says, no, man, I do. I really do. And hopefully in the next year or 2 years, things will start looking better and you know, we can get you back. And I said, no worries. Appreciate it. Good luck. And so that's when I started looking for other opportunities. I looked at New Japan, Old Japan, WCW, WWF. And WWF, Vince McMahon was the one that came after me the hardest. I mean, like, he wanted the deal closed. I mean, when I made the call to him, it wasn't a week later. I was up in the office in Connecticut. I believe it was Connecticut, where he brought me in, sat down, talked with me, tried to work a deal out. And next, I think 2 nights later, I was on on the Monday Night Raw. Having this angle with Farouk. So it happened fast. So Vince really had an idea of what he wanted to do, and I was a part of that idea. So, and it just, from what I can see and everything that I've watched up to this point, man, he made a genius move. Yeah.
Well, you kind of came from when you entered the WWF scene, they took what had happened with you previously in the kind of UFC world, and they kind of seemed to bring that into the WWF world, as in you were this dangerous man who could submit anyone, you could overpower anyone, and they kind of drove that for a long period, as in, like, even when you lost games, you lost matches, you never lost them clean. There were always, a disqualification or interference, and you could see that. Was that your idea, or was that Vince's idea to kind of push you as this kind of dominant, unstoppable force when you kind of came on the scene?
Yeah, that was Vince's idea. He came up with the angle. He came up with all the I Quit match with Bret Hart and Stone Cold, with me being the referee, and just all these things that really tried to help take his company in a different direction, like the attitude. He wanted that attitude to come out on screen. He wanted us to push the envelope so that we were different than anybody else.
Mm. And you're probably one of your most famous kind of stints or memories anyone has of Ken Shamrock in the WWF would have to be, your feud against The Rock, or as other people might know him in cinemas, as Dwayne Johnson. But they put you as, Intercontinental Champion, which is a big enough belt at the time. And, what was it like to feud against someone like The Rock, who I'm sure he's one of the top bookers at that stage?
Yeah, I tell you, it was fun because he was very professional. It was fun working with a guy like that, where I could trust whatever happened in the ring. He had great mic skills. He was a great athlete. So going in the ring and being able to put matches on with him was a tremendous time, because I could do all the things I needed to do because I knew he was able to do them with me. So we had this angle, and the things that we did there were just, and I wanted it to be stiff. Like, I didn't want to have to sell something that didn't land. And so for him and myself, the matches worked out great because I made sure that he understood that, I'm not going to sell something that I don't feel. I need you to be able to lay stuff in there. With the chair shot, hit me in the face, so he throws the chair and hits me in the face. So all these things are the things that I wanted. Right? I called those. I wanted those to happen because, to me, I wanted people to understand that Ken Shamrock is the world's most dangerous man, and not just in one way. But not only is he a tough guy, but he's also a guy that feels no pain.
And you kind of touched on it there in relation to, if most wrestling fans will remember that chair shot you took to The Rock, which was full on. How planned were these matches? So say when you're going out to fight The Rock for a title, do you go over a script? Do you react it before the actual show? Would you just have a small discussion beforehand and then, just let your wrestling and your acting do the talking in the ring?
Yeah, basically we just go in and we just go at it. We call some spots in there, but basically we just kind of go at it, especially during that attitude era.
Yeah, it was anything goes in relation to comparing it today. But today's soft. Today's soft compared to what we did. No, it is. And was a big factor of what you did in the ring, kind of based off the kind of crowd's emotion or how they reacted to a certain move in the game, in the match, I should say, or else if one of the fighters was seeing the bad guy, was it encouraged that the bad guy would kind of rile up the crowd by, do maybe cheap shots to the more popular one?
No, not with me and The Rock, man. We basically we were ourselves. We went out and did things, and we had matches and stuff, but neither one of us were playing off to be a good guy or a bad guy. We just did what we did. However the crowd took us is the way they took us.
Okay. And I suppose with the crowd and, the fact that you were fighting The Rock and, you were like top of the game, kind of top level wrestler. Was there any moment in time where you thought, am I going to have to get onto Vince here and kind of get in his ear and say, I want to be a top guy? Because a lot of people suggest that, you should have been a WWF champ, but that never materialized. Did you think there was a time after your feud with The Rock that you were going to get pushed up the ladder rather than kind of stay more or less in the same position?
Well, I had always thought that the idea was to put the strap on me because of where I came from that no holds barred era, because that would really push WWF and WWE into legitimacy. Having a guy like myself carry the strap, especially during that era, where MMA, no holds barred, was just really kicking off. So the whole idea for me to carry the strap was something I had always thought that they had planned on doing, and for whatever reason, it just didn't happen.
Okay, and did that affect? You know, I the reason I ask because I have no idea what kind of wrestler dynamic of the relationship with Vince is like. But you know, would you be regularly talking to Vince, or would he be talking to you about what he saw you doing, or how he viewed your character being pushed, or you know, was very much he would talk to the top guys, the guys who were popular?
Never got into that with Vince. You know, it was we go to work just like it was business, and they would hand us our scripts and the stuff that how the show was going to go, what time we went on, and so we would understand when the show lights would go on, what time we walk out, time we need to be in the gorilla station. All the necessity things we need to know about TV or the house show, depending on whatever it is we were doing. So, but we never a discussion with Vince, you know, about any of that stuff. These things were already planned out 6 months in advance. So there was already storylines going on for quite some time. So we all had an understanding about what it is we were doing way in advance.
Okay. And I suppose the last thing I want to kind of ask about, you know, the WWF is what was the dynamics like backstage, say, with the wrestlers, because it's almost like a traveling circus. There's so many people, there's so many bits and bobs, there's so many personalities traveling to and from different cities every day. Was there ever a time where, you know, there was individuals who kind of fell out with each other or were getting fights? Did you ever get in fights, or was it quite a diplomatic and calm place to be when there's so many, as I said, wrestlers?
No, it's business, you know. It's no different than any other professional sport, you know. When you go into your locker room, you go in there, you got a job to do, and you go in and you get ready for your job, and you go in and you get your job done. And that's literally what it is day in and day out. You got a job to do. And it's no different than a football player having to go to practice all the time and then go have his game on Sunday or Monday, depending on when he's playing. It's a job. It's not that college style anymore, the high school thing anymore, where it's fun, it's entertaining. Now it's a business. It's your job, and yes, it is fun and it is entertaining. We do enjoy it, but nevertheless, we have a job to do. So therefore, we have to be professional. And we have to be there punctually, and we got to be ready to go out and do what it is we're asked to do.
Okay, and I'd say just to finish off on the WWF topic is, so I was saying you were traveling around city to city, and you know I've read a few books in my time about, you know, the WWF and even UFC and stuff like that. But I remember reading it was Brock Lesnar's book, and when he was talking about the WWF and when he had his first stint there, he was saying it was very tough being on the road for such a long time, away from your family and away from, say, the people you loved. And, you know, stages where you were ever thinking, is this the right job for me? I'm missing home. I'm getting bumps and bruises every night. Or as you said, were you just, you like, this is business, this is my job, this is what I have to do? What was your outlook on it?
Yeah, basically it was a job. And every time you went to, you had to be there punctually. You know what time you had to be in the building, and you know what you had to do that night. And, you know, so like I said, every night you could have a different opponent or the same opponent, but you wanted to do better than you did last night. So you try to come up with better angles, better storylines, maybe even better moves. So all these things in your head to try to improve your business and your job. And so I always wanted to be the best. And so I was always looking for ways for my match to be the best. And so when I would go to a building, that's what I do. I make sure that I was on time, make sure that I planned everything out. I made sure that I tried to do better than I did the night before with whoever I was with. So it was fun, and I enjoyed it. But at the same time, it was business, and I need to make sure that I do the best at that. I wanted to be the best at it. So it was never a time that I got to a point where I didn't like it. There was a time that I got to when I felt like I wasn't, it's like I didn't feel like I wanted to be there anymore. It's because I was like missing my kids' graduations, and I'm missing my kids' football games and their birthdays, and it seemed like every time, and I had 4 kids, I was missing
must have been tough.
I was missing them growing up. And so I would get homesick. Wasn't like I didn't want to be there and I didn't love what I was doing, because I did. But it was like torn between two things that I enjoyed doing. And so, so that was tough, missing my family, missing the things, my kids growing up, missing birthdays and all the things of that nature. So it was a tough go there. And so I had to make a decision on what I was going to do. And so I had to make that decision. And unfortunately, there was a lot of other things that happened in the locker room during that time that helped me make those decisions.
Okay. And as you're saying on these decisions, you eventually go on to leave the WWF, and like why did that come about? Did you just you felt the time was right to go back and do mixed martial arts, or was there an outside factor? And even with that decision, was there any regrets at the time of leaving the WWF?
Well, there was a lot of stuff going on there. There was a lot of different stuff happening. And so I think with all of that, with what I had to think about and things that I knew, and the decision that I had to make, it was really one where I thought, like, I had to make the best decision for me as a person, as a father. What was the best decision for me at that time? And so I felt really at that moment that the best thing for me was to just step away from pro wrestling, and get back to my family and to get back to my life, to figure out what it is that I needed to do to be successful for my family and for my future.
Okay, so then that puts you, if I'm not mistaken, a few months, maybe a year goes by, and then you find yourself back in the UFC with a feud with Tito Ortiz, correct?
Right.
So, talk me through that, because it's not probably the last time I'll say this on the podcast, but, today's viewers, they're all thinking, then the McGregor era, but, you and Tito, your fights pretty much lay down the, legacy. It was the first real trilogy of fights that it just opened the floodgates for fans, exposure, and that, I think it was really the first time that you could see the media element of it, where that, Tito wanted to get under your skin and, you wanted to get under his skin. So, talk me through maybe leading up to that first fight with Tito, how did you mentally prepare for it? And, what would the difference between the UFC maybe, from your previous stint to what it was like then?
Yeah, I tell you, it was a good time, because that's when it really went mainstream, where people started turning their heads mainstream. You were hearing it on Best Damn Sports Show, and you started to hear it on ESPN. And so you really started to hear a little bit of the mainstream getting involved. And and they were dying before that, it was literally, they couldn't do anything. And so when I came back, I basically told them, I'll blow it back up for you. And so when I came back, that was my intention, was to figure out how to get the media involved, how to make it exciting, how to get people to turn their heads and look over here. And so I created a lot of different opportunities with the feud with me and Tito, different things that I did to try to get that press to turn their heads and look at the noise being made over here. And so by doing that, it really created an opportunity for the UFC to get known, for people to start saying, why is all these people talking about this thing? What happened? And so I would always be in Tito's face. I would always get into a scrap with them, or whatever it took to get people to notice. And you look back on it now, and I think that so many people underrate what we did at that moment, because it was really dying. There was no money being brought in. They were getting ready to close the doors. And I came in and said, I can do it. And I did it. And there's no recognition and no credit given to that.
Yeah, well, I think it nearly could have been, it was before its time, because as you were saying, the UFC was declining. Viewers were not paying any more attention to it. And then suddenly, out of the blue nearly, got these two naturals of promoting fights going head to head, and obviously your former champ Tito is a championship style fighter. And
you got to look at it like this. Was Tito was already there.
Yeah.
Tito had fights with all kinds of different people trying to get the ratings up. And they couldn't do over 30,000 buys with Tito as the champion. I mean, Tito was the champion. He was still fighting. And they brought in all kinds of opponents for him so that they could get ratings up. They couldn't get over 30,000 buys. When I came back in, I told them, I said, I can build it up. I said, I can get the numbers that you need. In fact is, I did it. I was so positive that I even bet my pay on that I would get paid off of what I brought in. I was so confident I could do that. And so you tell me, through my whole career, from the time I first stepped into that ring to the last time I stepped in that ring, I have always broken records. And I've fought different people all along the way. So you tell me who the guy is that really can market and bring numbers in. I proved it every single time I stepped in the ring.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't disagree or argue against that. But I'd say with that, you come back, you promote the fight, you get big numbers with Tito, but obviously, you know, the end result was Tito getting the victory over you. How did you deal with such a big loss? Because as you said, you know, the UFC was mainstream now. You were seeing, probably hearing your voice on the radio, seeing yourself on TV. By putting yourself out there verbally and getting involved in the mental aspect of the fight, did that make losing to a guy, say, like Tito, that much more kind of difficult?
Losing sucks no matter what. I mean, I hate to lose no matter what.
Yeah.
But, you know, I mean, for me, it was about putting the UFC back on track. And when I took that fight with Tito, I knew that it was going to be tough because I was 40-something years old. And Tito was 24, 25, in his prime. Yeah. And he was very good. And so for me to go in and take on that fight, I knew I had an uphill battle. I knew it was going to be tough. And so going into that fight, I wasn't blind and I wasn't stupid. I knew the chances of me winning weren't going to be very good, but I still put it out there. I still went out there and I did what I could. And it wasn't like I took the fight because that's the fight I picked. I took the fight because that's the fight that they asked me to do because they were dying. And they needed the numbers to be brought up. So I told Dana White I would do it. Then I would bring those numbers up, knowing that the fight wasn't a good fight for me.
Well, it's a brave thing and a noble thing to do at the end of the day. And as I said just briefly earlier, that fought him 3 times. And one of the times you fought him later on, you know, you did the whole Ultimate Fighter television series. And that kind of gave, you know, you and him more of a platform to verbally go at it while also putting your coaching skills to the test. But, you know, what was it like? Because it was a relatively new show back then. What was it like to go up against Tito on the Ultimate Fighter TV series with eventually getting into the octagon again with him?
Well, for me, like I said, the bottom line was about putting the UFC back on track. It was about getting them out there and keep that because that's my legacy. That's my DNA. If that dies off, then there's no history, right? So for me, it was important that it lived and that it stayed relevant. So I did everything I could to make sure that happened, including doing the reality show, which is not something they offered it to me the first time. I turned it down because I just felt like it's just not a platform that I would be good at coaching. Because my coaching is much different. It's much more harsh, and it's a longer period of time before you get to step into the ring with the way that I train guys. You know, I had a fighter's house. You had to be in the fighter's house. You had to live there for 6 months to a year before you got in the ring and fought. Because it was important to me that when you went in there, you represented a brand, which was the Lions Den, and that you went in there when you fought, you had to represent very, very strong. And that's why that brand early on was so powerful because I just didn't let people go in and fight. So when I did the reality show, it was a completely different format for me. I had to train guys that didn't really want to do the training I wanted them to do. They didn't really want to have to go through the process of what I wanted them to do. And so it was almost like wearing kid gloves with these guys saying, oh, okay. And I did. I basically just let them do what they wanted to do because I felt like if anybody really wanted something, especially from me who had all the knowledge, I'm not going to force it down their throats if they don't want it. The guys that came and trained with me, they went through a tryout and they gave it all in order to be there and work out with me. And those guys all became world champions sooner or later. On a reality show, it was like I wasn't going to do that. I wasn't going to give these guys something that they hadn't earned or that they didn't want to earn. And I felt like on the reality show, if these guys didn't want to work out hard enough to get ready for fights, then I wouldn't push them.
Yeah, well, that's actually a fair enough point to make. And I suppose just to pop back to the whole promotional side of it, the media side of it, I suppose it seems, since I'm from Ireland myself, what are your thoughts on, Conor McGregor? Because when people think of the UFC now, or, they think of fighting now, even in boxing, Conor McGregor's the big name. And, what you just think of his impact on the sport. And probably I'd be more interested in, say, his legacy in the UFC, because he hasn't fought a huge amount of fights. But having said that, some people would argue he's done more than anyone has for the sport. But I'm just curious to get what your opinion would be on him at the moment.
Yeah, I think what he's done has been awesome. I mean, what he has done for the sport at this point in time has kept it alive. He's made it relevant. And I love what he did, man. I love the crossover. I love the way that he's really even now starting to really educate people on that they need to start controlling their own business. And their name. Don't let these people take your name and not pay you for it. And so he's raising a lot of awareness to that, and along with Mayweather, who did it in boxing already, who's developed his own organization. And I've said this many, many times before, if those two would get together and develop their own organization, whether it be boxing or MMA, and put on their own shows, they would corner the market right now, because I believe that they would do what's the best for the fighters as far as pay.
Mm. And and probably you just brought it up there in relation to pay. Currently, the UFC's under a lot of scrutiny from the media. Even I remember reading quotes from yourself about the lack of pay, the Reebok sponsorship that's recently come in. Do you think it's a huge problem with the UFC right now from their pay structure point of view? Because everyone looks at all the big paydays that McGregor gets, or even someone like a Brock Lesnar comes back and makes 8 to 10 million. But you've got about 70 to 80% of the fighters who are making 50,000, maybe 100,000 per fight. But the thing is, they have to pay. They have to pay for their camp. They have to pay for their food. They have to pay for travel and other expenses. So they don't end up making a huge amount of money for the amount of time they invest into it. So just what are your views on the current state of, the UFC, but more importantly, their treatment of their fighters?
No, I mean, I'm not blaming the UFC now. This has been going on because there's new owners there now. So, but the other ones, they sold it for $4 billion. Look how many people before that did not get paid, and they were saying that they weren't making enough money to pay them, but yet they turned around and sold it for $4 billion. That to me is where the crime came in, way before now. So many guys didn't make the money they needed to, and so many of them are on welfare and they can't pay their own bills, and this just shouldn't happen. It breaks my heart that you got a person that sits there that never stepped in the ring and fought, that gets $375 million or whatever it was, telling other fighters that they couldn't pay him because there was no money, but yet they walked around with $375 million. Just because, didn't invest $1. It's just sickening to me that the guys that went in and put the word in and put their blood and tears and sweat in that ring, didn't get the right amount of percentage that they should have gotten, because their lives would have been changed. They wouldn't be where they're at right now. To me, that's the crime.
And you personally, like when you came back for, say, your second stint in the UFC and you were fighting Tito and stuff like that, did you ever feel at the time you were being undervalued, or do you think you got looked after? You were just maybe a bit more pissed off at other people who weren't getting looked after, who deserved to get looked after?
I was definitely angry about the people that weren't. Obviously, I knew that I wasn't getting what I wanted because I've had my fights with them too. But, I'm not gonna go into that because I accepted what I accepted. But even though I didn't know some of the numbers, then I was definitely lied to. But here's the thing: is that it constantly it keeps happening. It's almost like nobody, and including the media, nobody wanted to go and say, "Listen, you guys are robbing these guys. You're not paying them." Because they were afraid they'd be kept out, wouldn't be able to report on the fights, or that they wouldn't get the news that they needed, or any of this other stuff, whatever the threats were. And it's wrong, man. Everything about that whole thing, with the way the fighters were getting paid and how people who had opportunities to expose them didn't. It's just so wrong. Because these guys went in there and they're the ones that hit and bashed on and out there in the ring. Fighting and being told that, hey, this is what we can pay, you can't pay you anymore, which was a lie. They had plenty of money.
But you not think it's nearly like an example of this would nearly be like someone like Mark Hunt in the heavyweight division, who, you know, he's fought 2 or 3 guys who've all been tested positive for performance-enhancing, you know, drugs after, and he's tried to take the UFC to it, and he's tried to voice his concerns about fighter welfare and start up these unions, fighter unions, and, you know, the UFC they haven't budged an inch. Do you think it's ever possible for maybe a fighters group to start up and, you know, get more pay, or do you just think they're going to continue to be exploited?
No, I think unless there is some sort of law that comes in that it stops this kind of slavery or extortion, however you want to put it, because these guys really don't have a position to fight back, because if not, they don't get used. So whatever you want to use that, it is what they're doing. They're using it against them to be able to make them have to take what they give them because there's nowhere else to go. And to me, that's wrong. You should be paying people according to what they're bringing in, according to what their status is on the fight card, on the pay-per-view card. If that money's coming in, they're not coming in to see the promoter. They're not coming in to see the UFC. They're coming in to see the fighters. And if those fighters are on the card, then those fighters should be getting paid a percentage of what's being brought in on the pay-per-view and the door. No exceptions. Percentages of that. And not 1% or 0.1% is what's really coming out to after you look at it. It is ridiculous, the amount of money being brought in to the UFC. I'm not talking about now, but then. And then what they were paying out to the fighters that were on the card. That's I mean, it's close to slavery.
Well, I can't not but agree with you, but I think it's just one of those things that people like yourself can voice about it. As I said, some of the fighters currently today voice their concerns about it, whether it's sponsorship deals, whether it's welfare, whether it's not being paid or poor treatment. But I just think it's something you just have to accept and be pissed off about. But at the end of the day, unless something dramatically changes, it's probably going to continue, which is unfortunate.
It's a shame. It's a shame unless somebody like Conor McGregor or Mayweather get together and they form their own organization and say, you know what, well, let's show these promoters and these other people, you know, how fighters are supposed to be paid, and start paying out percentages on the fight card so that they understand and know that, and educate the fans to how bad they would not paying the fighters, being able to educate the fans on how much money was actually coming in and that they weren't paying them.
Yeah, no, I agree. And to kind of move on from the UFC, your time came to an end there and tried out some different organizations, and you ended up, your last few fights ended up being with Bellator. Some people speak positively of, you know, the final days of your career. Some people have kind of mixed reviews on it, or mixed words to say about it. I personally think you've done a hell of a lot for mixed martial arts. You've also done a good bit for the WWF, WWE community well. And as you said, with the Hall of Fame inductee as well, that just showcases how important you were to mixed martial arts, and especially the UFC. But what would you say to some of the people who would look at you and say, he fought on too long, he fought past his prime? Do you just say, listen, I love the sport, I've given my all to the sport, and they need to kind of just shut up and accept it? Or is there part of you that kind of thinks, maybe I shouldn't have done those last 1 or 2 fights, maybe I should have known when to call time in my career? You know, what's your view on the final years?
No, listen, I think people, they have their opinion. And there's nothing wrong with that. People can have an opinion, but what they have to understand is this: I have never in my entire life quit on anything. I have always done everything I could to make sure that I succeeded in everything. And it's not like going up and turning a light switch on and off. It doesn't work like that. So since I have always been a person that never quit, I've always been a person that's constantly fought on, in life included, never laid down or gave up, constantly kept getting up and answering the bell, because I always knew that if you keep getting up and you keep going, good things happen. It doesn't just turn off. Like, you don't just go one day, go, okay, I guess it's over. Because I wasn't built that way. My DNA, I'm not that way. I constantly kept getting up, answering the bell, because I knew good things would happen. And that's how I became a world champion. That's how I became successful in the world that we live today. It's because I constantly kept getting up and never giving in. And so all of a sudden, when that time comes that you're supposed to quit, you don't know how to. And then people want to say things about, well, I fought on too long, you should have stopped fighting. How am I supposed to know that? How is me personally supposed to know that? I have to keep going until I can't go anymore. Then I know. Then I know it's over. It's done. I didn't give up and I didn't quit. It's just I can't do it anymore. But how do I know that unless I do it? And I realize it. Say, okay, it is coming. No one can do that for me. Only I can. Because if I quit and I still have something left, then I feel like I've cheated myself. And I've cheated the fans and the people that love watching me fight. I've cheated them because I didn't give it my all. I didn't give everything I had. I have given everything I possibly could to get in the ring and fight and continue to keep fighting. I've tried everything to stay in the ring and keep fighting. I've changed my diet. I've done everything I could to stay in the ring and keep fighting. And time, Father Time, just wouldn't let me do it. And so there was that point in time after I've been in the ring a few times and I kept trying to find ways to win, and I couldn't. I realized then it was time. But now I know. I'm at peace. It's not like I have to second guess myself, say, man, I could have done another one. I think I could have done another fight. I don't have those questions anymore. I know.
Okay. Well, no, it's an interesting way to look at it, because a lot of people would say, I felt my skill set was going, I felt my power was going, but in your mind it was, I'm not going to quit. I'm going to keep going until mentally.
I was going to find a way to win. I was going to find a way to win. And with do you consider yourself retired fully now, or do you ever see yourself? So do you see yourself ever coming back to mixed martial arts, or even maybe the wrestling circuit? Possibly the wrestling.
And are you looking to would you do a lower type of show, or are you just looking for WWE to maybe give you a short stint like they have with the likes of, Kurt Angle or The Rock or Goldberg?
Yeah, I would never go. I won't do if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it at the top.
And do you think there's a possibility of that? Like, have you openly try to contact these people, or are you just kind of keeping yourself to yourself, and if someone wants you, it's the onus is on them to call you?
That's it. The onus is on them.
Okay. And I suppose the last question I would have for you is, when you look back in your career to date, whether it's mixed martial arts, whether it's in the UFC, whether it's Bellator, these other organizations, do you see yourself as the finished article? Did you look at everything you accomplished and went, what, I couldn't have done anything better, I couldn't have done anything less with my heart on my sleeve or whatever? Or, is there a bit of a bit of regret in there, or is there ever a time where you think, oh, I shouldn't have done that, I shouldn't have gone there, I should have fought him instead of him? Or, you know, do you look back with all the experience you had and think, I did everything I possibly could and I'm proud of it?
Yeah, I mean, I can honestly say that I did everything that I wanted to do. And that I had a clear conscience when I did it. I didn't do things for money. I didn't do things for popularity. I did things because I wanted to. And I was never forced into a bad situation because the decisions I made, they were calculated and they were always thought out. That's why I was able to sell out at 53 years old, 52 years old. I picked my opponents very carefully on who I was fighting and how I was fighting them so that I had the most success in every time I stepped into the ring.
Nice. Okay. I normally finish the podcast with a few quick fire questions. So going to just throw a few questions at you, yes or no questions or whatever, and you can do your best to answer them truthfully or to the best of your memory anyway. But question number one would be, who's the best wrestler you ever worked with?
Multiple. There was a lot of them. I have to work with a lot of them, but the one that was the most exciting to me and had a great rapport with was The Rock. Okay.
And what was your highlight, your best moment in the UFC apart from winning the championship?
Being inducted in the Hall of Fame.
And what would whether it's WWF, mixed martial arts, or anything else, what is the biggest regret of your career to date?
Oh, the biggest regret? I don't have any, other than I wish I was younger. but I don't have any. I really don't have regrets.
Okay. What is your favorite film?
Ooh, my favorite film. Ah, man. The Godfather.
Nice, traditional.
Yeah.
And I'd say just second last question. If you could fight anyone on the UFC roster right now, who would it be and who do you think would come out on top?
Well, I can't say that he's even in the UFC, but it's somebody that's still present and still out there. But I would like to have been able to fight Brock Lesnar, and would love to have been able to have all of them. But the one thing that I've always thought of and that I've always wished that I could have had a shot at was being able to fight Tito Ortiz in my prime. That's something that I always wished I was just a little bit younger so I could have at least had a better fight.
Yeah, no, agreed. It would have been some matchup to see you, as you said, in your prime against him, and it would have been an interesting
fight. Yes,
a battle of words as well. And last but not least, would be sum yourself up in 3 words.
Kind, thoughtful, and vicious.
Yeah. That's a good way to sum it all up. But no, that concludes the podcast, Ken, and I just want to thank you for coming on and sharing your insights to the many different aspects of the sporting world that you've experienced throughout your life. And I wish you all the best. And as I previously said, with the podcast, that will be linked below for all the listeners as well. I suggest you check it out, as you can hear about Ken's life stories and his opinions on other matters in much more detail. Ken, I just want to thank you a lot. I really enjoyed interviewing you, and I wish you all the best with your future endeavors.
Well, hey, I thank you very much. I appreciate it. If you guys want to check us out on our podcast, it's dangerouspodcast.com. Check it out, man. Thank you, bro. Appreciate it.
Okay, Ken. Take care.